Artificial intelligence is being increasingly used these days, and that includes in schools. In fact, 44% of American teenagers say that they're likely to use AI tools when completing assignments.
Artificial intelligence, or AI, is being used more and more in classrooms.
In some classrooms for older kids, administrators have found a place for artificial intelligence.
But is this technology a blessing or a curse?
25% of teachers in America think AI does more harm than good for their students.
Now to a growing problem facing high schools and universities around the world, ChatGPT. Students are using it to cheat on tests and even write essays.
Could the advent of AI negatively impact students' learning?
A lot of work. This is 3 minutes compared to 3 weeks of work, right? And then out comes the paper, and you can get, that's what's happening, and it's happening all over the country.
The state of cheating before ChatGPT didn't actually make it worse.
No, they just made it much more accessible.
Exactly.
It's like legalizing marijuana.
Exactly.
Or should we be more optimistic about its use in classrooms?
If it's introduced to them not through the lens of being a cheating tool, and instead through the lens of being something that will help them, we have a better chance further down the road of them seeing it that way.
If Americans can broadly agree on nothing else, we should be able to agree that much of the bitterness and political tribalism that drives our public discussions is unhealthy for our country. In order to debate contentious public policy issues in a respectful and engaging manner without abandoning deeply held principles, the Cato Institute, in collaboration with the Brookings Institution, presents Sphere. In this episode, how does AI affect education? When it comes to adoption of AI, it seems reasonable to think that the kids are ahead of us, and also to worry about how it affects their learning and assessment. AI is certainly a tool with massive potential, but how can our children best learn to harness its power? And joining me today to talk about this issue, once again, we have Jennifer Huddleston, Technology Policy Research Fellow at the Cato Institute, Nicol Turner Lee, Senior Fellow in Governance Studies and Director of the Centre for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institution, and Mark Meador, a partner at the law firm Kressin Meador Powers and a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Tech Policy Centre. It's really good to be back with the three of you.
Yes.
We've done a series of discussions where we've examined artificial intelligence, or AI, and today we have an audience of Sphere teachers, and so we're looking at how AI affects education. When we've talked in the past, it's become clear that the three of you have areas of agreement, but also some distinct perspectives. So Mark, you're more of a conservative, Nicol, you're more progressive, and Jennifer, you're more libertarian. And I point that out because it's not always intuitive which positions you all have here. And for the purposes of this conversation, since we're focusing on the ways that AI affects education, I also wanted to point out that, Jennifer, you were a teacher yourself in an earlier career, and Nicol and Mark, you have school-age children.
Yes.
Yes. Jennifer, as a former teacher, I want to start with you. How do you think teachers should think about AI?
Just like any technology in the classroom, when it comes to the use of AI in the classroom, there's no hard and fast rule. In fact, I would say that's true not just for technology in the classroom, but for many of the challenges different teachers are going to face. The communities you serve as a teacher, the challenges you may face, the tools you have available in the school may all be different. So it's really figuring out what makes the most sense. One of the things that concerns me is when I hear calls to just broadly ban a specific technology from all classrooms, whether that's AI or the internet or even calculators. I think a better response is to consider when is this appropriate and how can we use these tools to both ensure that our children are still engaged in critical thinking skills, are still able to do the tasks that we need them to have that fundamental knowledge in, but are also very much prepared for the careers and education that they're going to encounter in the future. AI is likely to be a part of their lives in either a college or career path, and we don't want to see a world where students haven't been exposed to it until they get to that final workplace.
Mark, what do you think? Are you willing to see AI being used in schools?
Hypothetically, I think it really depends on how it's being used. I think there's a distinction between AI being used, this is, I think, applies to education, but also across the board as we think about AI. There's a difference between using it to augment something that we're doing, right, to make a certain process easier or faster, and then there's using it to actually replace doing or thinking. And I think, when we look at AI and like production, manufacturing, these sorts of things, it's whatever's faster and easier, we like that. Education is not about speed and ease, right? It's about forming a child. It's about increasing their knowledge, their ability to engage in critical thinking, and really to function as a fully human person in society. And so providing shortcuts to the doing and the thinking isn't usually helpful in that regard. And so AI playing a role in education in the classroom, where it could be, helping a teacher come up with a lesson plan or analyzing a paper to see if it was plagiarized. That stuff's sort of easy, intuitive. But if it starts to get into the realm of allowing students or maybe even teachers to take a shortcut to engage in less critical thinking, to not get the practice and development that ordinarily comes with education, I think it presents more problems there.
So Nicol, are you between these two? I mean, you are literally, but are you also between them figuratively? You've said that your daughter, who's in high school, does use generative AI to as a starting point for her papers. Does that sit well with you?
Well, I think what I'm hearing from both of my colleagues is, there's a place and space for everything, right? And in particular, AI can be useful when we start to think about where it can help us with efficiency. So I happen to be also the daughter of a special education teacher. And if you know special education, there were a lot of workbooks and a lot of inserts and a lot of, pamphlets that were given to students over the years. And with AI, you can actually do something, I think, which is even more interesting, which is sort of cognitive laddering, right? Where you're using the technology to give you the right cues and signals for the student to keep progressing through a learning plan. The same way with my daughter. She goes to school where they're able to use generative AI to think about ideas for research papers. She's in the IB program. So that's particularly helpful when she's starting to think about, well, what do I want to do that has theoretical underpinnings that will help me qualify for this? Not plagiarism, but it's a way to sort of get inspired by topics. The challenge is, I think, for both of my colleagues and Mark and Jennifer, what they've said, there's a space and place for everything, like I said earlier, right? Because you have to make sure when we're deploying these tools that not only educators understand them, but students do too. And they use it, it's almost like this conversation of use it with some moderation. What I also tell my child is, are you really thinking about this topic, or are you asking technology to tell you the topic, right? And you have to engage in those constant conversations so that young people can discern the difference between the efficiency or whether or not the technology is actually going to be used to replace their critical inquiry skills.
So it does require some vigilance on the part of parents and teachers to make sure that it's being used appropriately.
Yes.
I think what you're saying. Nicol, you have a new book coming out entitled Digitally Invisible.
Help me, everybody. Congratulate me. It was such a hard process.
How the internet is creating the new underclass. And so you've spent a lot of time thinking about technology and equity. Are you concerned about inequality in access to AI in schools? Because, I mean, hasn't it always been the case that rich kids have had better access to technologies? So is there something different about, or something special about AI that suggests we should be especially concerned about disproportionate impact? Because to that, I saw in The Economist recently, they had an article citing data that actually non-white American parents and children, students are embracing AI at a faster rate than white ones. So could this be different this time?
So I love that. I mean, and just for the folks that are interested in the book, it is available wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, as well as the publisher. First let me start with the premise of the book and kind of lead into this conversation just real briefly. I mean, the book was written at a time as a person with 30 years of experience working in digital access and digital equity issues, where we actually saw before the pandemic the fact that there were people who weren't online. I'm sure there were students that you realized didn't have access to some of the, just general tools that we see in technology, like a phone. The pandemic came, and 53 million school-aged children were sent home, 195,000 school districts affected. Many of you saw in a split second the pandemic basically stopped the type of learning that kids were experiencing and that you were giving. That also set us up to see the disparities that existed. We found that in very rural, urban areas where there were disproportionately people of color, we found people didn't have access. Out of the 53 million, maybe 30% of the kids actually walked around and didn't have a residential connection. In and of itself, we should be thinking about how do we let that get here, because we should have had a seamless experience given that technology is so generally purposed, right? No one thinks twice about the convenience that technology offers us. With that being the case, we learned a lot, and I really want to commend the educators in this room because it was very difficult. My book combines personal experience and going around the country talking to educators, talking to health providers, talking to employers. We were all in the same boat when it came to digital access. When we think about that, though, I think it also pivoted us to start to understand what role does technology play in education? And that goes to your second question about AI. We found that there's probably this necessary prerequisite that people have to be connected, and you have to live in communities where you have infrastructure. It's really hard to use AI if you live in a really rural community and you cannot get on the applications we're talking about. That means that you're going to be delivering products in the educational space that will frustrate young people. For developmentally determined kids, they will have challenges with a lot of different notifications. I found out during the pandemic, some of the parents decided to take their kids offline because their kids who are autistic or developmentally disabled just had problems with going to an online space. AI is not going to be very different. And we have to be sensitive to the fact that it could do two things. Despite the fact that we see high adoption among non-whites when it comes to technology, that's not new. The issue is it's the later entry or the later usage patterns that we see, meaning we have to make sure that when we're democratizing AI in schools, that we're giving the right instruction, we're giving the right training to teachers, but we're also doing it in a way that it's fair and equitable. Just because people can use it doesn't mean it's always fair. And we have to also be sensitive when it comes to AI, that we're not procuring these tools that say, yeah, I'm going to help you. You got a big class size. Use AI, and that will help you manage better your classroom or help you with lessons. And then we turn around and we find out that we're surveilling students in an even more granular way. And when it's not making sense to the student, the parent, or us, why Johnny still can't read. And so it's really important that we're sensitized to this introduction of technology. We close the digital divide so everybody can get access, but we're also interrogating the technology so we're not creating the levels of surveillance and profiling and discrimination that can affect students in a long time. It's really hard in education to go back and correct mistakes. It's really hard, right? Am I preaching to the choir on that one? Really hard.
So I want to come back to the idea of this of how to deal with assessment of AI in the era of AI. But before that, I wanted to see what you think about Mark's point before, that it could be that the use of AI could be destroying our children's ability to think critically. You seem to be quite enthusiastic about using AI in the classroom quite extensively, given that, as you say, in the future, many jobs will require a good knowledge and adoption of AI. So are you concerned that it will undermine the ability to think?
I'm not very concerned about that for a couple of reasons. I do think that AI is largely an augmentation tool, not a replacement tool. And there are a couple of ways that I see this kind of coming about from some of the things Nicole was just mentioning. First off, when we talk about AI education, I think a lot of times that gets the idea of learning to code again, or the idea of we need students to be able to create AI in the future. And that's not what I necessarily mean when I'm talking about being able to use AI in the future. I can see in a few years' time how an entry-level intern would be expected to know how to use AI in the same way that we would expect an entry-level intern now to know how to use a search engine or a research database or various other things like that. So ensuring that when students get to college or career that they're able to use the technology of the day so that we have everyone able to get the type of jobs that they want. When it comes to the creativity, again, I think about how technology has evolved our view of creativity and evolved our view of critical thinking at times in the ways AI can actually help even advance that. So the camera was different than oil painting. We still have paintings around. We still have wonderful artists that use paint to create artwork. But the camera also gave us a technology that is a different type of artwork, but is very much artwork itself. You think about movies and the way that we see AI and other technologies help create scenes that we could have only dreamed of a couple of years ago. So I don't think AI is going to destroy the creative spark in that way. And the way I think that it may actually help is I think about some of those students back in the classroom who would just get stuck on a certain point. And maybe my example as a teacher wouldn't resonate with them. But maybe it was a young man who really loved basketball. And the ability for me as a teacher or for that young man to say, go to an AI and ask it to explain a physics concept to him using basketball analogies is something that may be better than what I can do myself. Or again, in some of the communities where you may have non-native English speakers in your classroom and they're trying to engage in a creative writing project, and maybe I know the word for butterfly in the language I speak at my house, but not in English in school, using AI to help me describe something so that I can participate more fully in the classroom. Or again, as Nicole was saying, some students who may be on an individualized education plan or have other specific needs for modifications in the classroom that can use AI to more fully participate and perhaps even at times to feel a little less different than their peers.
This conversation about the use of AI as a tool of creativity reminds me of the panel we did a couple of episodes again around content creation and Mark, your concerns about how it might stifle creativity and feel free to comment on that as well. But I also wanted to get your perspective on how, if at all, the assessment process should change in the age of AI. You know, what gets the student the A? Is it fair if what tips the balance in favor or away from an A is the is access or proficiency with AI?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a good segue because I think those two topics are actually really intimately connected. So when we were talking about, I didn't think about this when we did the panel before, and I was hitting myself afterwards. On the creativity point, and I think this relates directly to education, thought of this example. If you had two people who both say, I'm a craftsman. One of them takes pieces of wood, they carve it out, they plane it down, they sand it, they fit it together, they build a rocking horse, they paint it, it looks beautiful. The other takes some wood, puts it into a machine, pours some paint in somewhere, and presses a button. The machine planes it, sands it, fits it together, paints it, beautiful rocking horse. Which one is a craftsman? Same way, if you had somebody who's a painter and someone came to them and said, I want a portrait of a woman, she has blonde hair, she's wearing this kind of dress, this is the background, the lighting, this is the style that I want. The painter paints it exactly the way they want. Which one's the artist? To me, clearly the people who are doing the carving, the craftsmanship, who are doing the painting, that's the artist. They're the one who are engaged in the doing of the act. And so if I'm to translate this over to your second question, if I'm teaching a student and evaluating their skills, you can make a space for AI. I think there's a spectrum, right? I don't want first graders using it to help them write. They have to learn how to write the hard way, the long way, the same way you learned long division before you use a calculator. So you understand the core concepts that are beneath it. Because later on, when you do use AI, you're going to use it better, right? Part of learning to use AI is learning how to do what the AI is trying to do yourself so that you can spot the gaps. You can spot a sentence that doesn't make sense or a line of thinking that doesn't actually line up, rather than developing a dependency on AI that prevents you from being able to spot those gaps and actually improve the product that the AI is working on. So if I'm grading, if I'm doing assessments, I want to assess if they're using AI, how does their use of that reflect the underlying competency and critical thinking ability in combination with the AI, not just who put in the best prompt and did some spell checking.
Can I respond to that?
Absolutely, please.
So here's where I'll civilly disagree on this. So I do think there should be a measurement of the extent to which we're leveraging AI so that we're ensuring the origins, right, of learning. So we're understanding your example of, which one used the machine versus which one actually used their hands to do it, which goes back to what Jennifer's talking about, which is no one's going to be using their hands to do anything in this country with technology. Now it's actually working, from the extent that technology and robots and all this other stuff that we've been talking about may ultimately shift the way that we actually organize work and occupations. But on your point of how do we get kids to be the creators versus having the AI, and how I'm paraphrasing, I do think that we have to have a discussion about that, because there are some kids that have never seen a rocking horse, right? There are some kids that would not know how to start the process of creating a rocking horse, because guess what? That's not their experience. There are some kids, like one of my kids, that intuitively math is just not their thing and they need some additional assistance. This is where I think we have to have the conversations in education about how do you introduce the technology as a democratized tool. Something that we don't criticize the kid that's in Anacostia that may decide, I want to use AI like everybody else because they're talking about rocking horses and I've never been to a farm. I don't know what they're talking about, but I want to use it to encourage my participation in an information ecosystem that allows me to have the same fighting chance. For me, as a person who's very critical of technology, does not think it's always very ethical, and always thinks that we have to think about who's designing these models, one of the areas where I've shifted my interest is in this conversation of invisible assessments, the extent to which the technology can be democratized, the extent to which it can actually help us close some of these gaps, these cultural gaps that we've seen for years. Since, Brown versus Board of Education, that comes a lot with the normative standards that come with learning and learning sciences. Could the technology, if designed ethically, culturally inclusive, help us to bring these experiences to kids that may not have the ability to travel the world and see? And that's the beauty of the internet to me, right? The internet is the low-hanging fruit for some kid wherever they are to actually imagine what it's like to sit, now through AR, VR, through AI at the Olympics with never going to Paris, right? Part of it is, can we figure out as educators how to do this right? So I agree with you on the sense that the people who are making decisions about the technology are the technologists. They're not the educators in this room. And if we were to sit at the table, and I'm not an educator by chance, I'm just a peer, right? I'm a child of educators, so I feel like an educator, right? Because that's how I was raised. But if we were to sit at the table with the technologists, could we actually imagine a more democratized world in which the technology reflects both experiences? So I think there's a balance, that we have to have. We can't say, no, Saquon, you can't use it, even though somebody else is using it, without being sensitive to the fact that this technology may be the low-hanging fruit to a new world.
I don't think we actually disagree that much.
Okay, that's good to hear.
I think that's a great articulation of the distinction I was talking about earlier in the way we use AI, right? Yeah. This isn't AI, but you see the younger generations now using YouTube to learn how to change the oil on their car,
that's
or do a lot of forgotten knowledge, things that weren't passed down by our parents because technology had made it easier. And now people want to recover that knowledge and ability to do it by hand. And the internet and technology provides a way to recover that knowledge. That's a really good thing. And I could see AI doing something similar, allowing us to recover those skills. That, I think, is an unqualified good. But that's a use case that makes sense in education, which is very, very different from, let me rely on the robots to do this work from me.
That's right. Well, and this is the last thing, but I think where we do disagree, though, is if we're saying that the way that we start kids is with critical inquiry and we cannot use these tools to augment that learning, we also find ourselves back into a historical predicament where all schools, all resources are not created equal. And that's why I get a little concerned, we don't want to have, and this is where educators find themselves creating policies and practices that try to stifle the use of technology in the classroom, which has a disproportionate effect on communities of color and students from marginalized, low-resource schools that do not get that chance to actually imagine that world without it being contextualized within the broader systemic, circumstances that they're in.
Jennifer, I'll give you.
Okay, sorry, Jennifer.
If
I know.
could
Let me
have been-
lay it over here.
I think I kind of want to try and bridge the gap to some degree as we find happens. Usually at some point in one of these episodes, one of us has this moment. I think a lot of Nicole's concerns may come, and I apologize, stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, is if certain types of schools choose to ban or disallow this technology, while other schools become the only ones where it's allowed.
Right.
That you end up with effectively creating another divide, because maybe if you teach in a public low-income school, either because of access to this technology or because of policies out of an abundance of concern that this is going to be used for plagiarism and we don't have the resources to check everything, it ends up banned in Anacostia but allowed in even a public school in Fairfax County or something like that, to use an example for those of you that may be based in the DC area. So do you have a situation where it's unfair to the student in Anacostia, where he's going to graduate and be expected to go into college and career and have been banned from using this and maybe not had those experience, and the student in Fairfax is going to be huge steps ahead. However, I think to Mark's point, there are some parents or some educators who want those specific circumstances.
I send all my kids to a school that has no technology.
Right, exactly.
By design.
Maybe you're a parent who wants a specific type of school. So to be the Catoite here, it sounds to me like what we have is another argument for school choice.
Right,
allowing.
Right. I was going to say, we were going down that little road there.
Allowing, I mentioned that this is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and that you're going to have a variety of classroom level and district level policies adopted. And what we may at times have is a mismatch between families and what they want and what they feel is necessary to prepare their child, and educators or education systems and how they view it. And so ensuring that either there can be a conversation between those families, that those parents can be as empowered to say, this is why I want my child to be able to use this technology in AP English Lit, or in his intro to manufacturing class, or whatever. And also parents who want to have other choices, have those be able to have those conversations as well.
I think that's an important high-level point too, that the conversation we're having is really secondary to what is your educational philosophy.
That's right.
And I think the way, and it's evident here, that each of us approaches the question of how AI should fit into education heavily depends on what do we view the role of education to be, what should education look like.
The purpose of Sphere is to debate and consider deeply contentious issues in a respectful forum. Mark, Nicole, Jennifer, thank you for doing that so brilliantly with us here today.
Thanks.
For more information, please visit projectsphere.org. Thanks so much for watching.